If you listen to 1,000 hours of Spanish as a native English speaker, what could you do with that in real life? In this video, I'm going to answer that question using the internet's favorite medium for communication, a tier list. What is going on, guys? My name's Nick. I'm the creator of Lengualytics and a fluent speaker of the Spanish language. I have 12 situations written out right here on my laptop, and I'm going to place them from A tier to F tier based on how comfortable I am navigating those situations using only my Spanish. A tier is gonna mean practically effortless. I can handle these situations no problem. It costs me very little energy, and it's similar to just using my native language, English. B tier is gonna mean mostly comfortable. I can still get basically everything, but it costs me a bit more energy to think about and to handle. C tier is gonna mean functional but lossy. So I can definitely do it, I'm just gonna miss some stuff along the way. D tier is where things take a turn. It's where I'm actually kind of struggling. I would say D tier is barely functioning. I'm hanging on, but it's pretty tough. I'm able to do it, but I'm definitely gonna miss a big chunk of the information. And F tier is gonna mean I'm cooked. Everything is just super hard. I can barely get a grip on anything. They might as well be speaking Korean. The first situation we're gonna talk about is ordering food, and I'm gonna give ordering food an easy A tier. I don't know why people discuss ordering food so much in a language. Honestly, you should be able to order food just by studying direct translations on Google Translate for like an hour. It's not hard. Knowing the language might even make it harder because then you have too many options to use to order food and you get in your own head like, what should I even say? But if you really think about it, at the end of the day, all you have to do to order food is like point to something on a menu. If I want to order food in Spanish, para mí, or you can just say the name of the food in Spanish. As long as you can pronounce the words, you're fine. I feel like most people just want to order food in a language to impress their date. When the waiter comes over, they're gonna say three things. They're gonna say, how are you? What do you want to drink? What do you want to eat? If you just know that sequence, there's no need for like knowing the language at a seriously deep level. Even if you're not sure what the waiter said, you still have a 1 out of 3 chance. Just take a guess. So yes, this is A tier, this is effortless. I don't want to hear anybody else talking about ordering food in a language. I cannot take it anymore. Next situation. Watching and enjoying native level YouTube videos. I'm gonna give this a B tier for mostly comfortable. A lot of people who are learning a language wonder, when can I, get into YouTube videos? When can I throw on a native YouTube video and just relax and watch it, have a good time? Now, personally, I think you should generally always be enjoying your time learning a language. First 150 hours are tough, but after that, you should be just listening to content that you enjoy, that you understand. That's the best way to grow in learning a language. But I will say listening to native YouTube content comes pretty far in the journey. I'd say it's somewhat comfortable at around 600 hours. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch. If you watch the same YouTubers, that definitely helps. But by 1,000 hours, it's definitely comfortable, it's definitely fun, and it makes language learning feel great because now you can listen to stuff that you actually really do care about and just continue progressing naturally. And if you guys want my recommendations, if you're also learning Spanish, Ibai, Luisito Comunica, and Gaspi. Those are all pretty male-centric YouTubers. I think mostly men watch them, but if you're watching this, I've seen my demographics. We're horribly undiverse. It's mostly guys. So those are my recommendations to you if you're trying to get into native Spanish YouTube content. The next situation is going to be phone calls with a native speaker, and I think these are going to get a B tier. I remember the first time that I was traveling and I wasn't with my girlfriend, and we had like a conversation over the phone, a full-blown, actual in-depth conversation, which we normally didn't have because normally we just talk in person, but I was traveling. This was like pretty tough, guys, and I think this goes to my theory that face-to-face conversation is much more easy than phone call conversation because face-to-face you have so much more context, so much more social cues. You can watch someone's mouth moving, you can see how they're emoting. Phone calls really strip all that away, and it can be a lot harder if you're not used to just hearing just the audio, right? Because the visuals help so much in language. We pick up so much body language, and so many things you don't even realize you're picking up on are the things your brain is actually using to understand people. A lot of people think language is just words and grammar. That is not true, and the further you get into fluency, the more you realize that a lot of what our brain is doing is stuff we don't even know it's doing, right? That's why actually watching people speak the language as opposed to doing something like flashcards or conscious study is so important, because you're picking up all these things that you don't even know you're picking up. So phone calls can be a bit tougher, but by 1,000 hours, they should not be too much of a challenge for you. At the end of the day, it's just two people speaking, and whenever you're speaking directly with one person, it tends to be a lot easier than a big group conversation, for instance. The next situation is a situation that I know every single person who wants to learn a language, they want to know if you can do this. That's going to be eavesdropping on strangers' conversations, and I have to sadly give this one a D tier. I'm sorry to disappoint everybody, but even at 1,000 plus hours, eavesdropping on people's conversations in public in a different language is still really tough. Usually they're speaking quietly. They're also speaking colloquially, because they're usually talking with a friend. You have to infer so much context. You just try to jump in and you're like, where the hell are we in this conversation? That's why context is so important. If you know what they're talking about, you can kind of focus in on what they're trying to say. But if you just jump into a conversation that you're not a part of, you're like, secretly, I will add, secretly, because you're not telling them you're a part of this, you're listening in. But if you jump into that conversation, you're going to be like, whoa, you're trying to get a grip, but you can't figure out really what they're talking about. So I can do it. I can extract some information, but it costs a ton of energy, and I'm barely hanging on when I'm able to do it. I'm like really listening in. Of course, this varies. Sometimes people are speaking very proper Spanish, very, slow, nice, easy Spanish at a nice volume. But a lot of the times, guys, if you're talking about just two natives in a restaurant communicating with each other, especially if they're not from the city, especially if they're more from rural areas and they don't have like an easy city accent, then it's just going to be super tough. But I wouldn't be surprised if I can get this up to like a C tier by like 1,500 hours, maybe even less. Hopefully at 1,500 I'll have some more help here, because eavesdropping is very fun and we all love to do it. The next situation is breaking up with your girlfriend, and I'm going to give this one a B tier, mostly comfortable. Breaking up with your girlfriend is probably one of the most emotionally charged situations that we have on this list, but I think people will be interested in knowing, can you do it after 1,000 hours of Spanish? Now, before I partook in the breaking up, I went on ChatGPT and I just put my thoughts into ChatGPT. I told it, like, translate that into Spanish so I have an idea of how I can say what I want to say in Spanish. So that wouldn't be like me learning words. It would be more like trying to get my thoughts kind of all together, because as we know, every language has their own set of breakup vocabulary you need to be aware of, and also you have these deep thoughts that you don't really express very often. Trying to get those out in a different language can be tough. After like one 30-minute ChatGPT session going over my thoughts, I found breaking up with somebody pretty easy. And I think it's interesting because when you're breaking up with somebody, you are like under emotional duress. So it's interesting to see how that affects your language. And personally, I think it makes you a better speaker because you're speaking, directly from the heart, which is more like implicit. You're not really thinking a lot about grammar. So I found it like a pretty comfortable thing to do in some sense, right? We're talking about in the sense of language. In terms of how comfortable it actually was, it's very uncomfortable. I really thought some of you guys might appreciate that because I don't think that's an insight that most people can give. All right, the next situation is going to be group conversations. And group conversations at 1,000 hours, I'm going to give a C tier. In group conversations, there's just so much back and forth where people are anticipating what someone else is going to say and they interrupt them midway through the sentence. And there's so much like subtle humor going on. It's not about your ability to understand grammar or vocab, guys. It's about your ability to follow a narrative in another language, even if you don't have all the pieces. And that's why it's super hard to understand group conversations, because they're built on the idea that everybody's following the message. Nobody's just thinking about, the words someone's using. In group conversations, as we know, someone starts talking, some other person knows exactly where they're going with it, so then that person just kind of interrupts them to a certain extent and they take over the conversation. And you as a non-native speaker are expected to follow that narrative so you can also anticipate where this person's going, where that person's going to go, and you can kind of follow the narrative as it makes its way around from person to person and pick up on subtle things like humor along the way. So this is really tough, and this stuff really requires you to learn a language in a very natural and automatic way, so you're following meaning and you're not bogged down by the individual pieces of the sentences that don't really matter. It can also be really hard to jump in, but usually people give you some leeway because they know you're not a native speaker. So, if you need some time to process a little bit, people give you that leeway depending on who you're talking to. A lot of Spanish speakers have never met a gringo who can speak Spanish at a high level, so just that kind of buys you some interest, so people are going to kind of care more about what you have to say. So I don't think jumping in is too hard, but it's definitely another aspect that makes group conversations difficult. All right, the next category is going to be following native TV shows and movies, and I'm going to give this one a C tier, functional but lossy, but it might even be kind of more to the D tier side, guys, because native movies and TV shows are like no joke. When I'm watching stuff in Spanish, I enjoy being able to kind of relax to a certain extent. I don't want to be like bombarded with a lot of things I don't understand at fast speeds. It just turns me off. I like watching stuff that's a bit above my level, but not too far above my level. And sometimes when you throw on a native movie or TV show, even if you understand it and you can follow along with it, you're like, oh my God, like it's just too much. It's like, this is just too much, right? Usually when I watch a native TV show or movie, I'd be doing it with my girlfriend and I could ask her for clarifications like what the hell is happening. That is useful. If you just have to go at it alone, like, I just think it's super hard. And I wouldn't be surprised if it takes me to like 1,500 hours or 2,000 hours before like I can really start to enjoy them. If you imagine watching something like Better Call Saul if you weren't a native English speaker. There's so much atmosphere and subtleties. It's so subtle. A native speaker misses a ton from that show. A non-native speaker is just gonna be like, what the hell is happening? I have no idea. That's just one example. Like, obviously a more straightforward show would be easier to follow, but I think we have to give credit to the fact that a lot of like the artsy stuff, a lot of stuff that's more artsy, it's really hard to understand even in our native language, right? To get all the nuances of things. So I guess this depends on what kind of media you consume. But another dimension of this is like watching Family Guy in Spanish, because you have the cutaways, you have the randomly changing plots. You've heard the joke from South Park that Family Guy is just a bunch of manatees pushing random words that fit together to make cutaways. Family Guy's plot is all over the place. It's super hard to follow. A lot of the humor is absurdist. It's just a new level of difficult. All right, the next situation is gonna be socializing at a birthday party, and I'm gonna give this one a D tier. It is really hard to be the only gringo at a birthday party for all Spanish speakers, because it already has all of the difficulties of group conversation, but then you add on the layer of awkwardness. You have to know how to break the ice in a second language, and most Spanish speakers are really careful about what they say around white people, because there's this stereotype, which is true, Americans specifically are offended by tons of things, so the Spanish speakers don't want to say anything to kind of like shake you, so it can be really awkward in the beginning, and you have to be the one to break the ice and be like, guys, like, it's chill, you can say whatever you want around me, it's not gonna bother me, right? And then you have to deal with the fact that it's intergenerational, so like you'll notice if you go to a Spanish birthday party that like the grandfather is going to be like final boss, difficult to understand, and the younger the people get until they're basically bilingual, the grandchildren are basically bilingual, you can speak to them in your native language probably pretty fine. Further you get up this intergenerational ladder, the harder it's going to be to understand people. So you go from like understanding nothing to understanding a little bit here, a little bit there. It's so overwhelming. In the specific case I'm talking about, this was like a Venezuelan birthday party, and I'm familiar with Argentinian Spanish, so anytime my Argentinian girlfriend would speak, it would sound like English compared to the other Spanish being spoken. It's funny how that works. Two people speaking the exact same language, but one of them sounds like perfectly comprehensible, and another person you're like, what the hell are you saying? I have no idea what you're saying, and you just nod along politely. Because in these kind of conversations, it's really hard to say I have no idea what you're talking about, especially when somebody sees you fluently speaking with somebody else. They just think, oh, he understands everything. You just say whatever you want to him. The next situation on my list is going to be a Tinder date, and that's going to get an easy A tier. I think at 1,000 hours, Tinder dates in another language are super easy. I think people underestimate how easy it is to understand what the other person is trying to say with very little context, just given the fact that most first dates tend to go in a more predictable way. There's just so much body language, there's so much non-verbal communication. Nobody's really coming out of left field with questions. So I think Tinder dates are perfectly fine at 300 hours. At 1,000 hours, they're basically effortless. In my opinion, if you're single, a Tinder date in a different language is like a rite of passage for fluency. I think a lot of people think in terms of CEFR exams. They say, oh, I have to score B2, I have to score C1 on an exam to prove I'm fluent. I think the best way to prove you're fluent is a Tinder date.
How well did you do on your Tinder date?
You're already going to be on really good standings with the girl you're on a date with, even if you have a basic fluency. But at 1,000 hours, I would say you're overqualified. And if you can't have a positive first date in Spanish after 1,000 hours of practice, you're doing something very wrong on your first dates, because just the fact that you're that fluent should basically give you an A+ on the date. The next situation is gonna be telling a story about something that happened to you, and I'm gonna give this one a C tier. As anybody who's fluent knows, it's always easier to understand than to speak. I still find storytelling a bit irritating to do. It just never comes out the way you want it to. You're always missing details. It's always frustrating. You have to find certain workarounds to say things you don't know how to say. I want to be clear that this is totally doable. If you're just trying to get some information across in a story you want someone to understand, then it's not hard. I mean, you can find a way to do it. You just lose the natural storytelling chops you have in your native language. I want all my stories to have an arc. But in your second language, it's just hard to set up the emotional stakes. It's hard to have character development. Everything is just harder to do. So I have to give it a C tier. All right, the next situation is something that very few people probably have experience saying they've done. So I thought it would be interesting to include here, and that's going to be translating for an asylum interview. And I'm going to give this a D tier, but maybe a bit closer to C. So I was translating for my girlfriend's asylum, I guess you'd call it hearing, where she has to tell her reasons for why she left her country and came to the United States. When I walked into the place, I had to sign this waiver that said, by the way, at this point I was not at 1,000 hours. I was around 600 hours probably. And I walked into this place, and I thought I was there for emotional support and translation if it was necessary. I just assumed that everybody would be able to speak Spanish, and I was just there to translate if necessary. That is not what you're signing up for. Because when you walk in the door and you sign the waiver, it says, I solemnly swear by penalty of perjury that I'm 100% fluent in the language that I'm translating. And then I was like, I don't know if I can sign that. The guy who gave me the waiver spoke Spanish, so I talked to him in Spanish. I was like, do you think that my level of Spanish is okay enough to do this? Because I do not feel comfortable signing this. He goes, oh yeah, you're fine. You'll be all good. Just don't worry about it. And I was like, okay. So it's maybe this is kind of just informal. It's the paper says you have to be a fluent speaker, but whatever, so I signed it. But then when we go to the interrogation room, I literally have to translate verbatim everything my girlfriend says and everything the person talking to my girlfriend is saying to her in English. And also, you have this guy who's on the phone, and he's on the phone listening in to the translation, and anytime you say something wrong, he has to stop the translation and clarify, right? So every time I did a translation, he would stop and be like, hold on, we need a clarification here. Now the irony was, everybody else involved in this interview was bilingual. The guy giving the interview spoke Spanish, the guy on the phone spoke fluent Spanish and English. Everybody was bilingual except the translator. So I was shaking. I was I'm gonna screw up this entire thing. Eventually, they just kicked me out. They were like, all right, no, it's all right. You can go sit outside. And then the guy who was conducting the interview, who wasn't allowed to speak Spanish, got permission to speak Spanish. So now the bilingual guy can just be the translator, which makes a lot more sense. It was really tough and really nerve-wracking. And now that I'm at more than 1,000 hours, maybe I could do it a little bit better, but I would never do that again in my entire life unless I had some actual practice doing like on-the-fly translations. Do you know how hard it is to like translate every single thing someone's saying perfectly? It's not easy, guys, and that's why it's a profession, and you should leave it to the professionals. And if you ever find yourself in this situation, do not listen to the front desk guy. Do not sign the thing that says you speak a language fluently if you don't speak the language fluently. Anyway, that's my experience with that, if you guys were curious. If that somehow comes up in your life, now you know. And finally, the last situation on our list is going to be sports commentary, and this is going to be our first F tier. I was looking for something to put in F tier, like absolutely I'm cooked, and that's really the only thing I can really think of is like I'm totally cooked if it's like a sports commentary. That's the only thing where I'm like, what the hell is going on? There could be other things that also could get an F tier, I just can't think of them. If any of you guys in the comments are at the 1,000 plus level, I'd be interested to know if you find there's something that's totally F tier for you, but that is my list. I think people trying to learn languages get so bogged down in the mechanics, like the grammar and the vocabulary, but the reality is the reason we're learning languages isn't to have perfect grammar. The reason we're learning languages is to be able to understand and participate in conversations or communication with other people from different cultures. And I hope this video kind of gives you an understanding of what you can really do if you do take in 1,000 hours of Spanish input at your level. I appreciate you guys watching to the end of the video. I do run a comprehensible input website called Lengualytics. It's full of user source comprehensible input at tons of different levels in 11 different languages. If you're trying to learn a language in a natural and automatic way, I recommend you check it out. It's completely free, and you don't even need to sign in to look around. And besides that, if you made it to the end of the video, I would appreciate if you liked it. Thank you for watching.